thing I could think of was, okay, get in there, fire your guns and get out again. And the flames started to appear all down the side of the cockpit.
Hello and welcome to the Fighting High podcast, making their story our history. My name is Steve Darlow and I'm delighted that you could join me for episode 1 of our new podcast, and what a way to begin. It's almost 20 years since I had the fortune to interview one of the few, Tony Pickering. Anyone who met Tony couldn't help but warm to the former Battle of Britain Hurricane pilot, humble, personable and sincere in equal measure. Tony's recollection of those momentous days in 1940, when the Luftwaffe was attempting to defeat the RAF as a precursor to invasion, is both fascinating and engaging. And it's worth having in mind that when Tony flew his first operational sortie in the battle, he was just 19 years old. This interview was originally recorded for the research for my book 5 of the Few and was presented on the Fighting High YouTube channel. Here we have carefully edited the interview for audio, so you can enjoy it here in podcast form. We'll hear Tony's recollections about his journey to become a fighter pilot, his initial short stay at an operational squadron, and his thoughts on the Hawker Hurricane. Then his time with 501 Squadron in combat. He'll take us right into the air battle. And there'll also be a brief insight to what life was like away from operations. And finally, Tony shares the effect the unrelenting battle had on him and his colleagues, along with a memory of one particular morale-boosting flight. So sit back and enjoy the wonderful Tony Pickering, who put his life on the line defending freedom during one of the most crucial periods in British history. Tony was born on the 25th of August 1920 and grew up in Leicestershire. Late in the 1930s, with the threat of war in Europe looming, Tony recalled that,
as young boys of 17 and 18 years of age, we used to see these aircraft flying over, and of course in those days we were interested in things like that, and I had seen pictures of the First World War, and in 1937 onwards I think most people realised that the war was coming. Churchill had warned us and things like that. Even when he was out of government he warned us.
Tony recalls some bright individual telling him about a friend who was in the Royal Air Force Volunteer Reserve
and was flying Tiger Moths from Anstey Aerodrome, about 5 miles away from here, at weekends, and was being paid for it, and was being taught how to fly. Well, gosh, what an inducement for someone to join. So I was flying Tiger Moths before the war. You got into an aircraft fairly quickly. They gave you a little talk, say for about 3/4 of an hour, went out and showed you the controls, and an instructor then would take you and show you round. After a couple of trips being shown around, he would then take you again and hand the machine over to you and tell you to do certain things and certain manoeuvres. And then he'd teach you how to land and to teach you how to take off. And when you'd done about 12 hours, the average about 12 hours for most under-training pilots, after about 12 hours, he would let you go solo. And most people survived going solo because we were fairly well trained. It was lovely to fly around and then, see what was going on below you and that. And then being paid 2 shillings an hour for doing it, which was a lot of money in those days.
When I asked Tony about his flying aspirations, he recalled an incident at his flying training school. The war at this point was 9 months old, and Tony's future was decided in a somewhat interesting way.
I was advanced onto what they called advanced training, and on a Miles Master, which was an aircraft very similar to a Hurricane. A wooden aircraft made by Miles people down at Reading, I think it was. But the thing was, I was at Sealand in Cheshire, which was a number 5 flying training school, and we were there. We should have been there for about 3 months, actually. I think we were there slightly longer, but that should have been about 3 months. And when we arrived there was a whole course of us arrived. We were told to report at 8 o'clock in the morning at the flight commander's office. The parade ground was in front. We were paraded by a flight sergeant who lined us all up, 40 of us. And he said, shortest to the right, tallest to the left. Tallest to the left, shortest to the right. So we went down like that, as you can imagine. Now, you wouldn't believe this, but it's exactly true. The flight commander was told that we were all there standing at attention. He walked out of the office, came up, he walked down to the middle, he put his hand down the middle, and he said, right, you to the left, the tallest, will go on to bombers. You to the right, the shortest, will go on to fighters. And that's how I became a fighter pilot. Now, that is the absolute truth.
It was very clear to Tony that he had a lot to learn, and I also questioned him about his thoughts on the enemy.
At that time, I realised that I'd got to be trained. I wasn't ready at that time to get into battle. There's no doubt about it, because I was, very much a learner. And as regards my feeling towards the Germans, I don't think I had any real feeling at that time at all. We'd got a job to do. I was only 19 at that time, and this job had to be done, and that's how I felt. And I think most of the people felt the same. There was no real hatred against them.
I asked Tony if, during his training, he formed any impression about the morale of the RAF.
Oh, yes, it was magnificent. There was no doubt about that whatsoever. The spirit, and we were all in this together. We would fly and fight for each other. There was no doubt about it. We wouldn't let each other down.
When Tony arrived at number 32 Squadron with two fellow fledgling pilots towards the end of July 1940, the Battle of Britain was already well underway. 32 Squadron had had its successes. It had had its losses, which needed replacing. Tony reported to the squadron commander.
He looked at me and he said, Pickering, he said, how many hours have you done on Hurricanes? I said, I've never even seen one, sir. But he said, I'll have arranged for you to go and fly Hurricanes at a Hurricane operational training unit. You'll get a fortnight's training on the Hurricane at Sutton Bridge. I think I was sensible enough, even at that age, to realise that I knew nothing about a Hurricane.
Tony now got to grips with the controls of the Hawker Hurricane. And his thoughts on the Hurricane?
Well, a good solid aeroplane, as I've been asked many times in the last 30 or 40 years. It was like comparing a good, hard-working cart horse, as I call them, or a dray horse, compared with a racehorse, which was the Spitfire.
And what did the training involve?
Well, it was actually flying the Hurricane, taking off, landing, of course, manoeuvring, flying at height. We did dogfights with our other fellow pilot in their Hurricanes. Formation flying, we learned how to fly in formation and things like that. But it was only a fortnight, so as you can imagine, we didn't learn an awful lot, but we did learn something. We could at least fly Hurricanes.
Arriving back at 32 Squadron, the CO informed Tony of his first operational duties.
Tomorrow morning at 3:30, you'll be awoken, you'll have a cup of tea, and you'll meet at dispersal about 4:15, and you'll take off from Biggin Hill, and we'll go down to Hawkinge, which is the aerodrome near Dover, and we'll sit there until the Hun comes over. You will fly as number 2 to a Flight Lieutenant Hector Proctor, and he'll tell you what to do. Now, Hector Proctor said to me that I never met him until the next morning, and he said to me, Pickering, he said, you'll fly as my number 2, you'll sit directly behind me, you will not be more than about 10 or 12 feet from me at all times. Whatever I do, you won't put your gun button on fire. I don't want you to blow me out the sky. Keep your gun button in the off position. He said, and we will attack the Hun.
As it was, although Tony did fly operationally early the following day, there were no encounters with the Luftwaffe.
The next morning, the CO said, called us all together. The squadron is being taken out of the line. We're moving up to Acklington, near Newcastle on Tyne. That was the next morning. He said, Pickering, you and your other two comrades, a fellow called Ray Gent and Tony Whitehouse, he said, you don't need a rest. I thought, no, we don't.
On the 27th of August 1940, with the fighting in the sky at its most intense, Tony, having just turned 20, arrived at Gravesend in the southeast of England, the home of 501 Squadron.
They were losing pilots, unfortunately, and they wanted extra men, of course, to make up the 12. I mean, I can remember occasions when we hadn't got 12 pilots. Probably 10 or 11 of us took off instead of 12. And the same with aircraft. Occasionally, not very often, but occasionally, we wouldn't have 12 aircraft. We hadn't got 12 serviceable aircraft.
At the time, the Luftwaffe, fighting to wrestle control of the skies from the RAF, was targeting airfields.
Now, I mean, I can even remember when Biggin Hill was bombed and the control room was put out of operation, when we had a man who sat on the roof of the control tower at Gravesend, which I understand is still there, although it's a housing estate now. The control tower is still there. We had a man sitting on the roof who had been injured. He was walking with sticks. He'd had bullet wounds through his legs. And he sat up there on the roof with a pair of binoculars and was directing us, because Biggin Hill control was out of operation for about 24 hours. That was all, a very short time. But he was directing us. He could talk to us and tell us where the Huns were, because by that time the Hun was coming over in large numbers, and the sky was black. It was like a thundercloud. You could see a big black cloud in the sky, and it was the Huns coming in, bomber formation. So it was fairly easy for him to direct us to them. There were occasions when we were sitting in our aircraft, waiting for a scramble. That was immediate readiness. In other words, they'd probably send a flare up from the control, a green flare or some flare or other would go up, and immediately you started your engines and went straight off. Took off information. That was, otherwise you'd be sitting beside your aircraft, and your parachute would be in the cockpit, and you'd just jump in, and the fitted lads, who did a wonderful job, would tie us in, put the straps on us and shut the door and start the aircraft, and you'd be off in about 2 minutes, something like that. Or otherwise you were sitting in the dispersal hut with your May Wests on, your parachutes in the aircraft. You'd have to run probably 30 or 40 yards to your aircraft, and that would take a little bit longer, say about 4 or 5 minutes before you were actually in the air. But that's the various stages of readiness. Apart from that, you were on 15 minutes available, where you'd be in your mess, and they'd get in a vehicle and get down quickly.
Away from operations, Tony gives us an insight to some of the lows and highs of service life. Firstly, one of the lows.
The food was terrible. I wouldn't have fed it to a pig. It was awful. In fact, I remember having been there at Gravesend for 2 or 3 days. We were flying, of course, and that sort of thing, in combat. And I couldn't eat the food, so I remember late one night going to a hotel in Gravesend and having a meal there. And as soon as I'd eaten it, I was as sick as a dog. And there's no reason my stomach couldn't take good food. But we had a very good flight sergeant, pilot, called Morfill. He actually was an ex-RAF boy, Holton boy. Excellent man, who'd got a pilot's course. He ended up as a wing commander, but he was a flight sergeant in those days. He spoke to the CO, whose name was Hogan, Squadron Leader Hogan, 501, and Hogan said, well, this is hopeless. And he invited all the sergeants into the officers' mess every night, because it was getting dark then, August, about 9 o'clock at night, and we were having our evening meal in the officers' mess, and that was different. That was we were fed by RAF cooks and that sort of thing. So in the officers' mess, the food was entirely different. And every night, we didn't sleep in the officers' mess, but every night we had our dinner in the officers' mess, and that made all the difference.
And then there was the traditional way to boost the spirits: visits to the pub.
Caterham, I think we went to. We used to go to Caterham. We used to go down at night time. The girls would come with us, the Welsh. And I will say this much for the Welsh, they were good, those girls. Because, Kenley was bombed, Biggin Hill was bombed. We were off the ground. But those girls were on the ground, and they had to take the bombing. They were good. They were only kids of about 18 or 19, these young girls. I had a nice little girl who I was friendly with. You just take her to the pub, and I'm absolutely certain that I never did any more than hold her hand. I may have kissed her a couple of times, but I don't think I did much of that. She was a lovely girl. I've never seen her since, but Jean, her name was. But always remember, I've never forgotten the girl.
Back to the fighting, and for Tony and his Hurricane colleagues, their task was to attack the enemy bombers.
Yes, that was our job, to go for the bombers, yes. I remember we did head-on attacks. That was our job. We went into these bombers head-on, fired your guns as you went through them, and then carried straight on.
When approaching the swarms of enemy aircraft, Tony recalled that they were
like a big black cloud. I think the only thing I could think of was, okay, get in there, fire your guns, and get out again quickly. Yeah, and that's what we did. Some of the more experienced pilots would probably mingle around a bit, but we sort of learners would get in there quickly and out again quickly. Yeah. Fire your guns try and get your guns onto one of them. Invariably, we were in as a squadron, you see. We would go in as a squadron, and there'd probably be three of us in line, more or less line abreast, in a Vic, going in, probably 50 yards apart by this time, because we were going into attack. But you'd go in as a section of three, and then as soon as you'd fired your guns and gone through them, you'd be split up. And another amazing thing was, I've seen it written down too, that you suddenly look around and you wouldn't see an aircraft. It was amazing, that was. I don't say it happened very often, but it did. You'd go through these bombers and you'd go tearing along. You'd watch for the 109s who were coming after you. You'd manage to probably get out of their way, and you'd lose them or they'd lose you. And you'd circle around and look around and you wouldn't see a soul. But then the CO Hogan would call up, and this was regular. He'd call up and say, Squadron Mandrill, we called ourselves Mandrill Squadron, 501. Mandrill Squadron, Angels, Mandrill Squadron, Angels 15, that's 15,000, or maybe Angels 20 or even 25. And he'd give you the code name of a place. I forget what Ashford was, but all these towns had code names. And so it would tell you by code to rendezvous at a certain height above a certain town, and you could probably get together. And I would say 70% of the occasions, after going through the bombers, you were able to reform again. But it took time. And by the time you got yourself reformed and he'd got his squadron all together again, by that time the Reddy Huns was on his way back to Germany. So very rarely did we get a second opportunity.
On the 11th of September, with Luftwaffe attacks developing, 501 squadron pilots, including Tony, were sent to patrol Maidstone, encountering a large formation of Heinkels and Dorniers.
We went in on a head-on attack. I was firing my guns at the bombers as they were approaching, because we would probably approach them a little above them and came down onto them. Got a bomber in my sights, pressed my gun button. I can't remember whether any bits flew off it or not, but possibly one or two bits did fall off it. But nevertheless, I suddenly felt a horrible bang. And what had happened, the front gunners of these bombers were all firing at us, you see. And somebody or other had hit me in my sump, took my sump away from me. And the oil pressure dropped immediately because I lost all my oil. So I just turned over and came down vertically away from these bombers. We were up at about 18,000 feet, something like that. Came down. We were just south of London at the time, somewhere over Kent, approaching London, probably 30 miles away, something like that. And I knew where I was. It was a clear, beautiful day, and I thought, well, this aircraft's had it. So I switched off the fuel. I thought I don't want any petrol coming into the engine, switched off the fuel, switched off my ignition switches, so I'd got no engine. I was completely, nothing was going into the carburetors or anything. No fuel was coming through. I didn't want to catch fire. Anyhow, I could look down below and I could see my aerodrome, Kenley Aerodrome below me. So I thought, right, I'll force land. We were taught to force land without an engine. And apart from the sump being shot away, the aircraft was fully controllable. There was nothing wrong with the aircraft other than the fact I hadn't got a sump. I lost all my oil, and smoke was pouring out of the aircraft, out of the engine. Admitted, I was losing a lot of oil and stuff, smoke was coming. I got down to about 3,000 feet, and I could see Kenley below, and I was just thinking, well, I better start getting my wheels down. You could pump your wheels down with a hand pump in an emergency, or you could blow them down with a CO2 bottle, little bottle which had got compressed air in it, or compressed CO2, and you just pressed a little red switch, and it was at such a high pressure it just blew your wheels down. But I didn't have to get as far as that because I could pump them, you see. But I didn't get as far as pumping anyway, because at about 3,000 feet, flames suddenly appeared. Yeah, from the engine. Something ignited. It must have been the oil must have ignited, and flames started to appear all down the side of the cockpit. And I should imagine I was out within about 2 seconds flat, because my cockpit was open. All I had to do was pull the pin on my harness and just stand up. And as soon as my head was clear of the aircraft, just above the cockpit cover, it pulled me out. The airflow, the slipstream pulled me out, and I was out and coming down. And of course, I pulled the cord and landed safely in the guards depot at Caterham.
Through September and October 1940, Tony's logbook filled with the details of operational sorties. For 501 Squadron, there were further successes, but Tony also lost friends. In regard combat specific for Tony, the most notable entry in his logbook is dated 29th of October.
We'd been attacking some bombers, and I'd been chasing some bombers, some Ju-88s, and I was in a Hurricane, and I got my throttle fully open and almost bent double up to the stop, and then bent to try and get a bit of extra power, which was stupid, really. But I got the throttle fully open, and these two Ju-88s, I was chasing two of them by myself. They went away from me with at least 50 miles an hour to spare. It absolutely amazed me that they were so fast, these two Ju-88s, my poor old Hurricane. And after a while, I gave up. They just disappeared. I suddenly saw a 109 coming up close to me, and I thought, right, you're not going to shoot me down, chum. And I manoeuvred with him and got behind him and gave him a burst or two, and he went in the ground somewhere near Dungeness. And once I got behind him, I think he realised we were more manoeuvrable. The Hurricane was more manoeuvrable than the 109. We could outturn him and that sort of thing. It was no good. The only thing he could have done was opened his taps and gone away quickly. For some reason or other, I'd probably got a bit of height on him, because if you've got height, you've got the speed, you see. And I managed to catch up with him okay.
I asked Tony if his adversary knew he was there.
Oh, he must have done, yeah, because I fired at him.
And did he take evasive action?
Well, he did. He tried to swerve, but he never tried to outturn me. He never came into a turn. Whether he was running short of fuel and he just hadn't got the fuel to start any, combat flying, he probably wanted to get back to the channel fairly quickly. And but nevertheless, he went in, and I can't remember what actually happened, but he hit the ground. But whether he got out or not, I don't know.
I asked Tony if he had any feelings towards the man he had shot down.
Not really, because, a lot of my chums were being shot down every day, and that was that. No, I don't know whether he got out or not. Maybe one day I'll know, but I don't know.
Tony has described the attrition and relentless operational demands during the summer and early autumn of 1940, and I asked him about the physical demands and also fear.
No, I don't think we had any fear. No, no. We did feel a bit wary at times because, especially when we moved to Kenley up from Gravesend, we were doing 3, 4 trips a day and sitting by our aircraft for hours, sort of thing. We were certainly knew that we were taking a pasting because we were losing chaps. I mean, chaps had been shot down. We had people who jumped out on by parachute and their parachute didn't open and things like that. Not many, but there was one, I think, in 501 and things like that. We were getting tired, let's put it that way.
But what about the effect on morale?
I don't think we ever thought for 1 minute we were going to lose. Typical British, you're always going to win. We were all like that. We were young and thought that. But at the same time, we were getting wary. I'm pretty sure the squadron were getting wary. We got a good CO, though. There's no doubt about it. Harry Hogan was wonderful CO.
Tony has a vivid recollection of one specific morale-boosting flight.
Up until this time, we'd either been just 2 squadrons, 253 Squadron were with us at Kenley, and we'd go together, take off as a wing, or even as an individual squadron quite often, mostly, I should say, as an individual squadron. But I do know that we were getting wary. Most of the chaps were feeling tired and that sort of thing. And the talk was, I wish I could get to bed a bit earlier and things like that. I feel tired. That's among the sergeant pilots. What the officers were saying, I don't know, because we weren't with them in the officers' mess. But I do remember vividly one Saturday towards the end of September, maybe early October, the Air Vice Marshal of the 11 Group decided to put about 12 squadrons up together. And he flew us up and down the railway line between Ashford and somewhere up near Croydon, that area. There's a long stretch of railway which is straight somewhere in Kent. It goes to Ashford, actually. And we were patrolling that line, which wasn't unusual because we very often patrolled that line. But we patrolled that line on a Saturday night. There wasn't a Hun who came anywhere near us, but he put the 12 squadrons up, and we flew up and down, and all you could see was a squadron of Hurricanes, a squadron of Spitfires, squadron above you, a squadron below you, and the morale at that, I don't suppose Park ever realised it, but the morale of the fighter pilots leapt up when we realised we were still in command of the sky.
And the RAF did indeed thwart the Luftwaffe's ambitions in the Battle of Britain, thanks to men like Tony Pickering. As Winston Churchill would say, never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. If you have enjoyed listening to these extracts, then Tony's full story is in the book 5 of the Few. Tony's interview was originally recorded during research for this book and is shared here to help preserve the voices and experiences of those who served. Thanks for listening to the Fighting High podcast. You can follow Fighting High on X using @FightingHigh. Visit fightinghigh.com for details about books and blog posts, and follow the Fighting High publishing page on Facebook. If you'd like to keep up with my work, you can follow me, Steve Darlow, on X using @SteveDarlow.